Hi, everyone. Visual working memory is an ability to maintain visual information over brief delays. If you put people in the scanner and ask them to remember something, you see a lot of activity in different brain areas. And people were asking what type of information they get represented in those brain areas. Are they different or the same? Our past work seems to suggest that at least in an early visual area and parietal area seems to represent information in a different format. So we ask people to remember a grading, and in during the delay, we sometimes flash another grading in front of them. By doing this, we have both the sensory signal and the memory signal, things that they see and the things that they try to remember, and see if they both can coexist in the brain. And also allow us to see the format of the code that used to represent those information in different brain area. And now we can quantify amount of information in the early visual area and the parietal area when you're trying to train the model on the sensory data and then test it on the memory data. As you can see here, memory data get plotted in green. And you can see that early visual area seems to do just fine. You can use the sensory code to decode the memory signal, but not so much for the parietal. For the parietal, you need to train the model on the memory data and then test it on the memory data. And now you can see that the memory data actually live in the parietal area, but they just live in a different format, which is not the case in the early visual area. But now this study asking a slightly different questions, not asking about the format of the code itself, but the type of representation that get represented in those areas. Now, what do I mean by that? I want to see if the representation is more veridical or categorical. By first, I have to compute representational similarity matrix. So I break down trials into 16 distinct bins and then go through each ROI. So you have n trials by m voxels. Then you can leave one trial at a time, use the remaining trials to compute the center of the average response of each bin, of each orientation bin. If you do that, then you can compute the distance from that leave one trial out to 16 bins and see how they're further apart. You do that n times, right? You're going to end up having n by 16 bins. And because each trial belongs to one bin, you can average them further and get a matrix of 16 by 16 bins. Now, each bin will represent the distance from itself to the rest of the bins, right? When you do that, then you can look at the pattern. And if it turns out to be vertical, you expect to see something like this, right? This is a toy model of vertical diagonal pattern. If it turns out to be categorical, for example, all the clockwise get lumped together and all the counterclockwise get lumped together, you expect to see something like a checkerboard pattern. The real data, though, looks something in between. So the real data, probably a mixture of vertical and categorical. So you can put the weights on those models and then sum them together to approximate the real data. And you can do that for all ROI, for the sensory and the memory, to see if they're different. And as you can see here, the upper row represents sensory and the lower represent memory. They're qualitatively different and also quantitatively different. Specifically, seems like the sensory model seems to have more diagonal pattern, while the memory signal seems to have both diagonal pattern plus categorical pattern as well. Now we go and then fit the model, and we find that if you put a weight up above and then of the vertical model up above and the categorical model down below, for sensory in gray and a memory in green, you see that in gray, you see a lot of vertical weights, but not for the categorical weight. For the memory though, you see both vertical and categorical, which means that memory seems to rely on both, but sensory rely on, it seems to have a vertical representation. And now, interestingly, you see that the weight for the categorical seems to grow as it progresses from left to right, which means that it could progress from lower to higher brain area. In short, if you look at a perceived orientation, it seems to represent something that more vertical, but not so much for categorical. If you look at the memory signal, it seems to have a mixture of both, and it seems to grow as it progresses from early to later visual area. And this suggests that once a visual representation no longer tethered to the outside world, it may be gradually progressed to something that more abstract or more just like representation that get represented in a higher brain area. And that's the end of the story. Thanks for your interest, and have a good day.